So tonight we're going to do an introduction to JavaScript, and we're also going to start talking about what's new with HTML5. And I'm probably going to do a little bit of that after every lecture. A lot of what's new with HTML5 involves JavaScript, so we kind of need to get started with JavaScript first. Now, not all of it requires JavaScript, just a lot of it. So we'll look at an introduction to JavaScript tonight, and we'll also start talking about what's new with HTML5. You probably want to consider getting a browser other than IE, as IE8 doesn't support HTML5 at all, and IE9 is Microsoft is only promising partial support for HTML5 on IE9. As far as I know, the current versions of Firefox, Chrome, and Safari all support HTML5. I've tested that on both my Mac and Windows, and then I've seen full support. Okay, so let's get started with JavaScript. So we'll start looking at JavaScript to write programs. We'll look at input and output statements, talk about some basic memory concepts, some arithmetic in JavaScript, precedence of arithmetic operators. You should remember that something like that from your last algebra class. It's the same precedence. And we'll talk about why does that happen sometimes? Okay, we'll talk about decision statements as well, and also different operators, which are also very similar to math. We will look at displaying a line of text in a web. We'll look at a couple of different programs, some input and output prompts, so like we said again, memory concepts, decision-making concepts, and a couple of other things. So JavaScript is a language that facilitates an approach to designing computer programs that enhance the functionality and appearance of web pages. Before you can run code examples with JavaScript on a computer, you may need to change your browser's security settings. Although, as far as I know, all computers' browser security settings allow JavaScript to run by default now. JavaScript is becoming an extremely important language with the advent of the Web 2.0 stuff. The Web 2.0, which is built on a series of technologies called Ajax, and the J in the Ajax stands for JavaScript. It's really the heart and brains of Ajax and Web 2.0 technologies. Web 2.0 technologies would not be possible without JavaScript. And it becomes even more important with HTML5. So we will look at that. The JavaScript commands are embedded in what they call the script tags, and we'll see an example of that. Some browsers do not support script tags. I doubt that's true anymore, except for very old ones maybe, but almost every browser now universally supports JavaScript, so you don't really need to worry about that. Forgetting to end the script tag for a script may prevent the browser from interpreting. Browsers are generally still forgiving these days, but you really don't want to forget the closed script tag just to be a good HTML programmer. String characters. For those of you who programmed in other languages, a lot of the stuff will seem familiar. Most languages delineate what we call strings inside double quotes. Some use single quotes, particularly database languages. JavaScript will support either or. Either one can be used. So that's actually a good thing. We'll see why later on. A string is simply a character string or a series of strings, a word, a sentence. Any character you can type on a keyboard is a string. It's text. and it can be enclosed in either single or double quotes. It's limited, basically. It just means the start and end of the sentence is in between quotes. Very often, if you read something and they quote an author, they'll put it inside double quotes or single quotes to say they're quoting the author. Essentially, everything has to be quoted. Anytime you use simple text, it has to be quoted or double quoted. And document object represents the HTML document currently being displayed. More that comes into play much more later on, particularly when we're doing Web 2.0 stuff. The browser contains a complete set of objects that allow script programmers to access and manipulate every element of HTML. Again, without this capability, Web 2.0 would not be possible at all. The object resides in the computer's memory and contains information used by the script. The term object normally implies that attributes or data, behaviors, or methods are associated with the object. More on that later. And then the most important one is something called the document object, or document object model, or DOM. Comes into play. It's very important. It allows you to manipulate the entire document. We haven't seen too much of this yet. We're going to get into the syntax of languages and methods, but what they're saying is that parentheses follow the name of a method. We'll see some examples of that. Every statement should end with a semicolon, also known as a statement terminator, although this is technically not required by JavaScript. It's generally put there because that's a standard in most languages and optional in JavaScript. JavaScript is case sensitive. That means that upper and lowercase characters behave differently. I think I showed you, we went through the whole ASCII chart thing a few weeks back around the first or second class. I talked about how upper and lowercase characters were different. Let's see that. Pretty sure we covered that. Yeah, binary example. Right? We said upper and lowercase letters have a different ASCII value. And so, because of that, the languages have the choice of either taking that into consideration or not. Most languages do. Most languages are case sensitive, which means they evaluate upper and lowercase characters differently. Remember, down to the hard drive, everything is zeros and ones. So upper and lowercase a are naturally different values. Always include a semicolon at the end of a statement to terminate it. This clarifies which statement, where one statement ends and the next one begins. Always a good idea. Again, JavaScript is case sensitive. Means upper and lower characters are evaluated separately. Most commands in JavaScript are lowercase. So if you're the type of person that likes to type with a caps lock, don't. So lowercase is most of the time what JavaScript uses. Otherwise, you'll get a syntax error of some kind. We're going to look at the document.writeLine method to write text to the browser, although I don't really like to use WriteLine. It's not generally used anymore. It used to be more common to use it, but actually it's not used as commonly anymore. Doesn't really play that well with the Web 2.0 stuff. But we'll look at it because it allows you to write stuff out to the browser. And our first example here on a script is going to use document.writeLine and this piece of text. Let me see if I've got that example somewhere. Probably I do. I have them, but it looks like they're in very bad order. Let's take a look at this one. Let me see, it might be one. Okay, I do have it on my server. We'll look at the source on this one. And we'll see it's using script tags to indicate we're going to do some script programming now. Document refers to, it's a object of the document itself. That's actually the document object model. This gives you access to the entire document. And we're saying write line, and it's simply going to write out this H1 tag. So everything between the script tags is JavaScript. And we are using a very simple write line command. So when you get a syntax error, it's not always on the line where you think it's going to be. It could be somewhere else. This is another reason for people to start getting Firefox, latest version of Firefox, or whether you're on Windows, Mac, or Linux. It works on all three. Not only does it support HTML5, but also the JavaScript debugger in Firefox, in my opinion, is the best JavaScript debugger out there. The one on IE is absolutely the worst. Actually, IE doesn't install a JavaScript debugger. It tells you there's an error. It does not give you good error messages. I don't like IE at all for development, particularly JavaScript. I like Firefox a lot better. So I would definitely, if you're on Windows and you don't have, even if you're not on Windows, whatever computer you're on, I highly recommend you download the latest version of Firefox. Write method works just like the write line, except it doesn't put a new line carriage return at the end of it. Otherwise, it's exactly the same. You can split strings onto multiple lines using the string concatenation character if you want. And we'll see a little bit more on that later. I'll give you an idea of what the JavaScript. We'll look at some of this stuff in Internet, or rather Firefox later, and I'll show you what the JavaScript debugger looks like. It's pretty good. Right, so I could split this onto multiple lines if I want. I would just have to it's called string concatenation, which allows you to break strings into multiple lines. Because usually strings cannot be broken onto multiple lines. In order to do that, you have to do this concatenation. It'll have to be on one line normally. Splitting out a statement in the middle of a string is a syntax error. We'll see that a little bit later. Any questions so far?